You're listening to The Tales We Tell, a podcast about spooky stories, unsolved mysteries, and local lore. I'm your host, Hannah Parch.
And I'm Katy.
Welcome back. Got a full house here.
Yep.
Apparently. Jarek is outside with his brother Connor and our nephew Tolly.
So if you hear thunks and like yelling and whatnot, it's them. They're burning stuff.
Yeah, because our studio is also where our back door is. And I don't know why they decided to all hang out in the backyard right now. So anyway, I have written down announcements and then nothing after it. So I don't have any announcements that I know of.
I have a story for you.
Ooh, okay.
So, like I told you yesterday, since you skipped out on taco night, literally people started arriving, and Walker wanted to know where Hannah was. When's Hannah gonna get here? I don't remember exactly what he said. Is like, where Hannah? Hannah?
Oh.
Hannah? And he was very upset that you weren't coming because he had asked about you multiple times before and multiple times after. And then this morning, I get him out of bed. We're chatting and blah, blah, blah. We go downstairs, and he goes and starts playing with his houses. Mm-hmm. And immediately, like, he just goes and reaches and touches his houses, and looks at me and goes, Hannah?
Oh, buddy.
I guess he remembered playing with those with you.
Yeah.
And was wondering where you were and why you weren't there to play with him.
I'm sorry. To be fair, I was working on the episode yesterday, and then we had a random dog emergency where our neighbors that I've never met before, are moved, I guess. They were moving, and they couldn't take their dog with them, which I already have a lot of problems with. Mm-hmm. And they waited until like 3 days before they had to move to try and...
Is it like closer towards the main road up here?
Mm-hmm. I think it's where the black truck is.
I don't know. I didn't remember seeing a black truck. It looked like there was a bunch of people that had a lot of stuff. It looked like a weird yard sale slash, like, I was like, are they moving? Because there was one car that was being like, there's one person that looked like they were loading up their car with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But then the way a lot of other stuff was sitting out, it looked like a weird yard sale. And so at first I was like, are they moving? Wait, no, it's a yard sale. Wait, no, what's...
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, never met these people before. And we had told them that we would contact Colonial, which is our no-kill shelter here. And we did, and obviously they're full. Like, they're always full. Mm-hmm. But then yesterday, as I was working on these notes, Jarek called me, and he's like, they're dropping the dog off at the county shelter, which is a kill shelter. And I guess they told them they don't have room there, so they're going to have to put the dog down. And I was like, okay, well, fuck this. So then we spent an hour or two frantically texting and posting and trying to figure it out. And thankfully, Jarek's coworker said that he would take, this dog's name is Chase. He's 2.5 or 3.5. He's so cute. They've had this dog since he was 6 weeks old. Anyway, so he's still at the shelter now because they were about to close when we figured this out. But I talked to someone there. I gave them my information, and I said, someone's coming Monday for this dog. So
do not put him down.
Don't do anything with him. So there's a happy ending, but there was also a lot of stress. And then
That's awful. Like, I understand. Like, on one hand, I want to be mad and be like, don't get a dog if you can't take care of him.
Yeah.
But I understand, too, like, people, live in a place where they can have a dog and can afford to take care of a dog. And then sometimes people lose their jobs or something. Like, there's some other financial thing happens and they have to move. And the only place they can move to won't allow dogs. So,
Yeah, I know.
Like, I understand that sometimes that happens, but then there's sometimes too it's like we're moving and we just don't want to take the dog with us.
Yeah,
like, that's not cool.
I think my problem was
how long they waited.
Yeah, they waited till the last minute, and then they were okay with leaving this dog at the shelter And I felt like they were, I don't know if they had talked to anyone else, but I felt like they were relying fairly heavily on us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I mean, obviously I'm going to help, but like also do the work yourself. Why couldn't you have asked around for months and more than 3 days to try and find someone who could take this dog so that he doesn't die? I think I just had a big problem with them being okay with leaving him at the shelter because good grief. I feel like, speaking of dogs.
No, that might have been a toddler. I don't know.
I feel like if that was my only option.
No, it was a dog. I hear the peanut butter jar.
Anyways, there's a happy ending. Chase is going to have at least a temporary home.
Mm-hmm. A foster situation.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll work out. But anyway, in the meantime, are you ready for part 2? It's only going to be really, well, I mean, it's not a great story, but we're only going to talk about the baby in the very beginning.
Yeah, I know. It's just a few minutes of the bad details, and then we get into the court drama.
Yes. And in your dossier, I went ahead and gave you all of the old pictures still, just because they're all still relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we'll get into it. Okay. So, we are talking about the Lindbergh Kidnapping. If you didn't listen last week, highly recommend you go back and listen because it's important. To recap, on March 1st, 1932, national hero Charles Lindbergh's 20-month-old son, Charles Jr., was kidnapped from their home in New Jersey. Through a series of ransom notes, they arranged to pay the requested ransom of $50,000, which I did look up. That's $1.1 million. In exchange for the location of the child, the location was given, but turned up nothing, and after weeks of searching, Charles Jr. was found deceased in a wooded area. So that's where we stopped. Okay, so on May 12th, which was the day he was discovered, how he was discovered, so there were these two guys, Orville Wilson and William Allen, and they were driving through Mount Rose, which I believe is between Hopewell, which is where the Lindberghs lived, and Princeton. So kind of in between. They pulled over so that one of them could pee, and he went like 50 feet into the woods, and he discovered this body.
That's lucky.
I know. I mean, granted, it was like 2 months after he disappeared, but...
I mean, I guess is lucky for us that that's where they happened to stop and he just happened to walk there. Probably unlucky for him, thinking, I'm just going to go take a quick pee in the woods, and then stumbles upon that site. Like, I haven't seen the picture, but, like,
yeah,
I can imagine that is not...
It, yeah. And this is the content warning. I'm very briefly going to kind of describe the condition. It was pretty badly decomposed, still somewhat recognizable. Both hands and a foot were missing. All the abdominal organs were missing.
Scavengers, like wildlife got to him?
Yeah, because he'd been there for a bit. So likely it wasn't like a sign that he had been tortured or something. It was just he'd been there for a while. The body was first identified by pieces of clothing, because even though it was like kind of recognizable and everyone was like, well, there is a pretty huge case right now of a missing child.
Yeah, but also, like, he's not even 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I don't know, kids, like young kids at that age, kind of all look alike in a way.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
Mm-hmm. Well, they took some of the clothing, and Betty Gow, who was the nursemaid, she identified the fabric from the shirt she had made for him, because she had made that flannel shirt. So she identified that first, and then she was also the first one to see the body and identify it, which I don't know why. I'm sure they, like, not forced her, but, like, I'm sure she didn't volunteer to do that.
Well, they're probably like, can we get somebody else to verify without having to have his mother and father see him? Like, I've got lots of memories of my mom, but unfortunately some of my most vivid ones are some of the last ones.
Yeah.
And it's when she's in the hospital and like really not herself anymore, and like I hate that those are the most vivid memories that I have of her. And so like I can't imagine being a parent and then having to see your child like that. Like,
Luckily, Charles Jr. had like his big toes or I guess his second toes overlapped his big toe on both feet. So that was like a distinguishing feature. And there was still one foot.
I was about to say, I thought he was missing one.
Yeah. And then also, this part was so heartbreaking to me. She counted his teeth because she knew how many teeth he had. I don't know. Yeah. Counted his teeth. She was able to identify him. Later, Charles Lindbergh insisted on seeing the body, and I'm sure it was like for closure.
Yeah, that's one of those things. It's like I can totally understand like needing to see him, like because it's one of my grandparents died during COVID, or like shortly thereafter or whatever. Well, things were still more or less on lockdown, so I wasn't able to travel to his funeral, and I forget that he died. Like every now and then it hits me. I'm like, oh yeah, he passed away like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's because I didn't get that closure. Like it almost doesn't seem real to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And like obviously people warned him that he probably shouldn't, but he was stubborn. So he also positively ID'd the body, and he said, "I am perfectly satisfied that that is my child," which is a very professional but also very sad statement. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was a fractured skull due to external forces. They also determined that he likely died immediately or like very, very soon after he received that blow to the head. And even though it was not mentioned in the autopsy, I don't think this is kind of when they begin to assume that maybe he was killed the night of the kidnapping. Because to my knowledge, I didn't see anywhere where they said, like, not time of death, but like essentially when they thought he had been killed based on the
state
condition.
of decomp, yeah.
But I think I'm sure they said it and it was understood that he's been here a while. They have not been holding on to him this whole time. It's not like this was done a few weeks ago.
Well, I mean, he's still wearing the same clothes, and it's been 2 months.
It's been 2 months, yeah.
Like, you're not going to have an infant in the same clothes for 2 months because they're messy.
They're messy.
So,
yeah. No pictures were taken during the autopsy, which was kind of strange. They also didn't collect any tissue samples. And although the medical examiner checked the airway to see if he had choked, he didn't check for strangulation. So I guess you could check like the bones or whatever. It would be different. Although most doctors agree that like it didn't really matter because the head trauma is definitely what killed him. Lindbergh insisted on cremation, like pretty soon after this was all done. And I'm not going to get into the conspiracy that Lindbergh orchestrated this because I don't believe it. But there's been a lot of, like, that's one of the things that people will point to is like, oh, he insisted the body was cremated like quickly. But the book that I read pointed out the press was like crazy. Someone had snuck into the morgue like during the night and taken a picture, and he was like very rightfully so concerned about stuff like that.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
he was like
I 100%. And also, his wife hasn't seen him yet, right?
Yeah.
Also probably trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And also, again, I was going to say that, and then also reducing the risk of someone getting a photograph or photographs being leaked.
Yeah. Because, and he said too that like he didn't want a grave site that people could like disturb, because this is still, I mean, it's the 30s, but people are still like taking souvenirs from things. which is just stealing.
Well, this is, post-depression times / still depressed times. Like, grave robbing is a thing.
Yeah.
Especially, I'm sure, of rich people. So, they're like, oh, well, maybe they'll bury him with his silver spoon or whatever. And
yeah. And then sometime later, Charles, by himself, flew Charlie's ashes out to the ocean, like over the ocean, and spread the ashes there. So he kind of had a little ceremony. Mm-hmm. Okay. So after the body is found, the police take over the investigation again, because we mentioned last time that Charles was kind of
orchestrating.
Charles was in charge. Charles in charge. So now that it's a murder case and not a let's find my child case, the police take over. There had been some speculation at the beginning of the investigation that the whole thing was an inside job. They pointed out that the kidnapper had known that the Lindberghs were going to be at the Sauerland estate, even though they almost, I don't think at that point, they were never there during the week. They only spent weekends there. And then this one day, or this one weekend, they happened to stay into the week because Charlie had been sick. So they're like, who would have known that they were even there? He knew which room the nursery was. He knew that the shutters on that side of the house didn't fully close. And he timed the kidnapping for when everyone was downstairs. And then they said, and no one heard anything. So obviously Charlie didn't cry or make some noise. So maybe he was familiar with the person who took him.
I don't know. I've had to wake my boy up. He's very familiar with me, and he still is not happy about it.
Yeah. Also, I mean, not to be morbid, but there are ways of grabbing a child and making sure that they don't scream.
Yep.
Betty was briefly a suspect. Hate that for her. So she was thoroughly questioned. Her boyfriend, whose name was Red Johnson, after they decided that Betty wasn't involved, they're like, maybe your boyfriend is. So he was questioned, and there wasn't any evidence really to suggest that he was involved at all. They found a lot of not a lot. They found very weak circumstantial evidence. They found a milk bottle in his car. And they were like, obviously that means you had milk for a toddler. And he was like...
I thought you were going to say, oh, he had, a specific type of ladder. It's the same type of ladder.
Not even
or
that. His story consistently matched Betty's, which was essentially that, they were supposed to hang out. She got called to watch the baby. They talked on the phone that night, and, that was it. But while he was, being investigated, they sent his fingerprints to the FBI. And they found out that he was in the country illegally. He was a Norwegian immigrant. And so they deported him. And he never came back.
Poor Betty.
I know. Another maid, whose name was Violet Sharp, became a person of interest. She worked for the Morrows, which was Anne's parents. So she was interviewed by police. I think they interviewed, all of the help.
Well, yeah, if you're thinking it's an inside job, then, the first place you look is the staff. Because they're the ones who have the intimate knowledge of the comings and goings and the schedule of how the house works. So, yes, even if it's not one of the staff, then, yes, looking at the staff's significant others or just whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they interviewed her, and she acted, very nervous and very, I don't know. They said she acted suspiciously during her interview.
Because she's a maid to rich people who have just had this major, horrific, I don't want to say scandal.
Crime.
Yeah, crime. This traumatic event. And, maids get blamed all the time when something goes missing. You don't want to be the maid when the baby goes missing.
I know. So her story, or her, alibi for the night, was that she had met this random guy, and then they had gone to the movies together with another couple, but she couldn't remember the name of her date, and she couldn't remember the name of the couple that they were with, and she couldn't remember what movie they saw. So police are like, that's
very sketchy.
Weird.
It sounds like she's just making that up to cover for what really happened, which wasn't the crime, but something else she doesn't want to admit to.
Exactly. So in her second interview, which was the day after the body was found, she changed her story to what I believe more or less is the truth. She said, we didn't go to a movie. We went to a roadhouse called the Peanut Grill, which I think was just like a bar. Mm-hmm. And she remembered her date's name. His name was Ernie. I think she still didn't remember who the other couple was. But like the way the police questioned her was very much implied, like, what's a nice girl like you doing going to a sketchy dive bar with
roadhouse?
Yeah. And it's like, which, well, obviously that's why she didn't want to tell
you. She wasn't involved in the crime, but she didn't want to admit to what she was really doing.
Yeah, I can imagine she didn't want her employers to know.
Yeah. Also, this is 2 months later?
Yeah.
That they're investigating, which, why didn't they interview everyone initially when the baby went missing? Or did they?
I think they did.
Okay.
Yeah. And they interviewed her a second time after the body had been found.
Well, because, again, like, I know that, you know, where your employer's child was kidnapped, that's going to be a significant night that you remember.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I struggle to remember what happened 2 hours ago, 2 days ago, much less 2 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, like, even just thinking details, like, I was at your house a couple days ago.
Yeah, what movie did we watch?
Well, I could remember that. Yeah. But, like, I couldn't remember what you were wearing.
I can't remember what I was wearing.
I could probably think hard enough.
I always wear.
But it was like you and another friend. Couldn't tell you what either one of you guys were wearing.
I remember what G was wearing.
Oh, she was wearing like a workout tank or something.
She was wearing like purple and magenta.
Oh.
I remember because I'm like, I like those colors.
Okay. I couldn't tell you what your kid was wearing. I mean, like, that was a couple days ago, and it's like, people don't remember those things unless it's like specific. If it was like, you know, and then Jillian went away and disappeared and hasn't been heard from.
Yeah.
I don't know. So part of what was strange about Violet's story is that she had apparently been dating I think he was the butler at the Moras, or he was another servant. His name was Septimus Banks. So they're like, why would you go on a random date if you've essentially already got a boyfriend? However, Violet kind of made it seem like she wasn't really dating this Septimus guy. He was an alcoholic. She said that she didn't like him, quote, in that way. So I don't know if they were just like on a break because his drinking had gotten out of hand, or if he thought they were dating and she was like, that never happened.
I'm just like, I'll go on dates with him, but we're not going steady.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Or we'll spend time together, but we're not.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, I'm free to date. Yeah. Well, she's whatever. She can do what she wants.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the police were so like insistent that Violet was involved. They were so belligerent and abusive with their questioning that she took her own life on June 10th. After learning that she was about to be questioned again. Like, someone said they're coming, and she was like, I can't handle. And like, if you read the transcripts of how they were questioning her, it's like, yeah, they were fucking abusive.
There's laws against this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
This is not how interviews are conducted.
Yeah, and like, of course,
that's how you get false confessions and such.
Yeah.
Or suicides.
Exactly. And of course, people who want to believe that she was involved or that it was an inside job are like
saying that as a sign of guilt.
Exactly, which is unfortunate.
Nope. I see that as someone who's been through a traumatic event and is now being harassed about. So like, not only has she experienced, you know, this traumatic event.
Yeah.
She's now being harassed for
exactly.
that thing. And so, yeah.
So a lot of people didn't think it was an inside job. They pointed out, for whatever reason, there were no curtains in the windows at this house. I don't know. That seems strange. One source said that the house had been photographed by the press so much that the location of the nursery was, quote, well known. I don't know about that, but I guess it's a theory. And it was also on a hill near some dense forest. So in theory, someone could hide in the forest and kind of like scope out the house. And then this book pointed out that their weekend schedule said wasn't widely known outside of their neighbors. So I think what they're saying is like, well, the general public probably just assumed that they lived there full time because it was their house. Mm-hmm. Like, why would they? Because what they did was they lived with Anne's parents during the week and then they'd come here on the weekends. But like, I guess if you're looking at it without any knowledge and not really knowing where they are, you would think, yeah, they're probably living in their home. Why would they be living with, you know, her parents most of the time? So, it's possible that the kidnapper just assumed that they were there full time and kind of
just got lucky,
so to speak. Okay. So the evidence that they have in this case, so they have the ladder, which I think you got a picture of the ladder. So it was 18.5 feet when fully assembled. It weighed 38 pounds, which seems like a lot to me.
I don't know. Ladders are pretty heavy.
Yeah. How much does Walker weigh?
It's 27 pounds. 28.
Okay.
But like Tolly's 30.
Okay.
So just pick up Tolly and
bring him in.
Estimate a few extra pounds.
8 more pounds.
Like, you know, even today's ladders, you know, being aluminum, therefore lightweight, still pretty heavy, especially if they're very tall ladders. Yeah. And that's a solid wood one, which is heavy.
Yeah. So they implied that it was like specially, like what was interesting about it was specially built to be essentially collapsible and mobile. So with the 2 pieces attached, it reached 2.5 feet short of the nursery, and there were scuff marks on the house to kind of indicate that's where it was. One of the 2 connected pieces was broken. I think it was a I don't know. It was broken towards the bottom, I think. What they think is that it broke as he was coming down because he didn't take into the account that he was going to weigh more when he was carrying a child with him. Also, they're thinking that's the noise that Charles heard that night when he said it sounded like slates of a orange crate falling or something. It was made by, quote, an experienced carpenter. They took it around to a bunch of hardware stores and carpenters, partly to see if anyone recognized it, which no one did. And then all of those people were also like, oh no, but it's like well made. So it wasn't just like slapped together. Okay, so they built a replica ladder. The police did to test it. They determined that a 170-pound man could use it without it breaking. But then they had this police officer get like a bag of sand that weighed the same as that Charlie did, and when he came back down, the ladder broke. So they have confirmed that the extra weight of the child is what caused the ladder to break. They also determined that because the spacing of the rungs was because I think you commented they were spaced out weirdly.
Very far apart.
So they determined that the kidnapper was either long-legged or athletic, which him being athletic would be consistent with what Condon described as
jumping,
him
running through the cemetery and jumping
scaling a fence.
So having long legs would help with that too.
That would help too. So maybe both. Oh, so when they were recreating the kidnapping and he's got a bag of sand, when the ladder broke, he dropped the bag of sand. So they were like, oh, maybe.
When you said it broke carrying him down, I was like,
yeah.
So I wonder if that's when Charlie died.
But that would also imply, which I think is kind of what everyone agreed on, that it was not the plan to kill the child, that it happened accidentally. Which doesn't make it better, but it just speaks to intent, I guess. Mm-hmm. So they brought in this guy named Arthur Kohler, who was the leading wood expert at the time. And, like, I love this because I'm like, this guy is just, like, following his passion, made his hobby a career, and, like, in a very specific instance, he's, like, the man. I'm like, it's like if one day there was a crime that required random Alcatraz knowledge, and I'd be like, this is my moment to shine. Like, this is Kohler's moment. So he examined the ladder. He said it had been built with dull tools, and he said it was someone who, quote, took little pride in his work, which I feel like was a little shade that he threw there.
But I thought, like, all these other hardware store and furniture and, you know, carpenter said, oh, it was well made.
Yeah, I think it was, like, well designed and constructed, and Kohler was just like, well, he's not taking care of his tools, so, like, he doesn't care if it's...
He's like, I'm just building this ladder for this purpose. It doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
It just needs to work.
So he identified that it had been made out of several different kinds of wood. The rungs were made out of ponderosa pine. The side rails were southern pine and Douglas fir. And then the dowel pin was made of birch. He also found in one of the side rails some additional nail holes. So not nails, but just where nails had been. And he figured out that this was a piece of wood that had originally been used for something else. There wasn't any rust around the nail holes. And so he was like, it wasn't something that was used outside, but, like, it was used for something. The markings, the pattern or whatever was unusual. So he was like, if you find where this came from, it'll be easy to, like, match it because it's very, like, specific. And then he went on this insane search. There was, like, an entire chapter about this. I have 4 bullet points. So he determined that the southern pine came from M.G. and J.J. Dorn Lumber Company in McCormick, South Carolina. How he did that, I don't know. There was some math. There was some markings of a shaver. I don't know. He figured out, like, how fast the mill thing was going and then cross-reference. I don't know.
That was some super wood sleuthing.
I know. He also found out that it had been cut between September of 1929 and March of 1932 based on, I don't know, like a defective blade.
Okay. We'll go with that. Sure.
Listen, there was a lot. He's, like, very dedicated to his job. So once he has figured this out, he spent months, because there's no internet, physically visiting lumber yards in New York and New Jersey that had received shipments of southern pine from that company within that time range. And on November 19th, 1933, he found a match at the National Lumber and Millwork Company in the Williamsbridge section of the Bronx. And that's important. The location is. So they find the mill. They're like, perfect. Now we're going to, like, see who purchased, you know, southern pine. And we're going to, like, have a list and it's going to narrow things down. Well, they were cash only. And so they didn't keep records of their buyers. And so Kohler just, like, was like, oh, I'll try again with a different kind of wood, and just started his process over. Meanwhile, while he was doing that, Condon had given a physical description of the man that he spoke with in the cemetery to a sketch artist. And that is your first picture. And they point out that, like, Condon knew at the time that he was going to need to remember what this guy looked like. So he was paying attention more than like you and I were the other night.
Yeah, no, he was paying attention with the intent of I'm looking at this person, how would I describe his eyes, his nose, his cheekbones, etc. Which, let's see, let me take a swing at it.
Okay, I can give you the the verbal description.
Go for it.
All right. He was between 5'9" and 5'10", 160 to 170 pounds, a triangular face with high cheekbones and a pointed chin. But there was another time where he said his face looked like a triangle that had the point cut off, which makes me think not a pointed chin. High forehead, large ears, which that does not show large ears in that picture, but whatever. Deep set eyes, and about 35 years old. Not included in the sketch, but significant, Condon also said that there was a fleshy lump at the base of this person's left thumb. Don't really know what that means. And I don't know that he gave it to the sketch artist, but he remembered that.
Yeah.
He's like, there's something weird about his hand.
It's a distinctive thing.
Yeah, exactly. They brought in a psychiatrist named Dr. Dudley Schoenfield, and he created a psychological profile of this killer. So he's not criminal minding. What's the show that I watched that I can remember the name of? Where they create psychological profiles of serial killers. Mindhunter.
I was about to say, it's Mindhunter?
He was mindhunting. Mindhunting. Jeez. Forgot how that word works. All right. So according to him, their kidnapper / killer, was between 30 and 40.
Their kid killer.
Exactly. He said that he, quote, might even bear some resemblance to Lindbergh in appearance. I don't know why he thought that, but that's what he said. He said that it was probably an amateur criminal based on the fact that he consistently insisted in the ransom notes that the baby would be returned unharmed. He said usually what you see is them saying, if you don't cooperate, we're going to kill the baby, or you're not doing this right, you better straighten up because we have your kid and we're going to kill him. And all the ransom notes that this one sent, he was like, I want to return your baby unharmed. He's fine. Don't worry. Just give me the money.
Not fine.
Like, obviously, lies.
Why do you keep insisting? Like, why are you encouraging the whole he's going to be returned thing? He's not.
Yeah, it was maybe one of those, like, you're protesting too much. Like, why are you insisting that he's fine? Is he not fine? You're saying he's fine a lot. That makes me think something's wrong. He said that the man that Condon met, that we have the sketch of, was probably a go-between for, like, because he's like, there's more than one person involved, he thinks. So he's like, the person that you met probably wasn't the actual kidnapper because he was willing to talk to you. Wait, hold on. I said that wrong. He was not a go-between. Okay. Okay. Back up.
Yeah, you're going to have to...
There's a million.
My brain went on a weird tangent and I kind of spaced out for a second.
It's okay.
And then you got confused.
I got confused. There is a theory that there's two kidnappers, but I don't think that we're here yet. Okay. So he believed that the man Condon met was likely not a go-between, which I think is what he was saying. He was like, oh, I've got to talk to my boss and I can't do this or whatever. He said a go-between wouldn't have very much information about what's going on. Also, he wouldn't have the authority to accept $50,000 instead of $70,000, which he did. Condon was like, I have 50, take it or leave it. And he was like, okay, I'll take it. Like, if you got a boss, you're saying, hold on, I've got to go ask my boss about this. So he thinks because of that this person was working alone, that didn't have anyone else involved. He said he's probably a German immigrant because obviously he spoke with a German accent, and that he likely lived in the German section of the Bronx. He was probably a carpenter with mechanical skill. He probably thought very highly of himself, although his position in society was probably pretty low. He said he probably blamed others for
it's just general white male confidence is all.
Exactly. So blaming others for the lack of respect that you're shown or for your low position in life. He said he was probably jealous of Lindbergh's fame and kidnapped the baby as a way of showing his superiority to Lindbergh. he said he was...
Leave the kids out of it.
No.
Leave the kids out of your pissing match.
He said that he was probably very cautious and probably would never confess if they caught him. And then he said he was maybe suffering from schizophrenia, which I guess makes sense.
I mean, especially if he's like acting as though he's not working alone. But then again, like there's the phone call and there's a woman's voice and like other muffled voices in the back. So like, I mean, is he working alone? Was he just... was there just a random conversation happening behind him? Or like,
was he pretending that someone was in the room so that you thought there were multiple people involved to make himself look like he has more power than he does? Mm-hmm. And then Schoenfield does his own little detective work like Kohler did. So he looked at the last ransom note that gave the location of the child, allegedly.
On a boat somewhere.
So Schoenfield thought that when he had written Gayhead, which I guess was the name of a location, he said it looked like he had changed it, like it was originally another word. He thinks the word was Gun Hill, which is a major road in the Bronx. So based on that, and the location of the cemeteries, and other locations that were mentioned in the letters, he concluded that John, Cemetery John...
likely lived and or worked in the Bronx.
Yes, specifically in the Williamsbridge section of the Bronx, which is where the lumberyard was. So everything is adding up so far. FBI...
Time to start canvassing.
I know, right?
Are you a German immigrant? Are you a German immigrant?
And to be fair, I think that was like one of the German areas of the Bronx, so didn't help. There's an FBI agent named Ed Sulzbach. He's a detective today. And he pointed out that if this case were being investigated today, they would probably be looking for a different kind of suspect. Like essentially not what Schoenfield had just described.
Interesting.
He said that if it was him, he would be looking for someone in their 20s or early 30s who had antisocial personality type, who was highly intelligent, had a really big ego, an impulsive nature, and little or no regard for others or capacity for relationships.
So is it like, does he mean that if they made the profile today based on the crime, that's what it would be? Or that like society and other things have kind of changed to where...
I think he's saying based on the crime, that's that's the profile he would have put together. Okay. Which I feel like he's basically describing someone with either psychopathy or sociopathy who doesn't have any... This comes up later of like not having any empathy.
Yeah.
Being really...
Playing games with the whole
manipulative
notes thing too.
Yeah. So meanwhile...
I don't know. Which profile do you feel... I mean, I guess that's hard to say knowing that, at least who they think did it. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's controversy around that, but... I have a theory that we'll get to shortly. I think it's... I don't want to say both, but there is someone who fits the updated profile really well. And so I don't think that the first profile was bad. I think it's, good based on what they had, but the modern one is like pretty specific, I think. Yeah. I can see elements of both being... Like, I can imagine a person who is, both, a mix of those two doing a crime like this.
Yeah.
Either which way, definitely somebody who's got some mental issues.
Exactly. Not a well person. So, meanwhile, the police had been watching for the ransom money because they had written down all the serial numbers, and they had also made some of the ransom money to be in gold certificates, which I don't know why America did gold certificates. I have a picture. I think your next picture is of a gold certificate. It's like a regular bill with a gold seal on it.
Oh, okay.
But the reason they did that is because they knew they were going to be going off the gold standard soon, and those were going to all have to be turned in, which again seems just like an unnecessary thing.
Well, what is government if not to be entirely unnecessary?
Exactly.
Just kidding. Government is necessary. They just do a lot of bullshit too.
They do a lot of dumb things. So they gave bank tellers a list of the serial numbers. It was such a huge list, right? Because it's $50,000 in essentially small bills, I think is what he wanted it in. So they have this huge list, and they're like, okay, bank tellers, it's on you now to check every bill that comes through against this serial number list, especially gold certificates, because those were like less popular.
They've more or less like been more or less turned in, kind of
and
a thing.
They're at least ones where you're like, you notice them,
like,
you know,
people aren't getting them from the bank, or they're not getting them really as change from the store anymore. It's like if your neighbor has one and pays you in that, or if you have one in your piggy bank and you just haven't spent it yet. It's
exactly. But because it was like such a huge list of serial numbers, a lot of bank tellers were just not doing it, which I understand. I probably wouldn't do it, because if you have a line of people trying to deposit money and you're like, hold on, I have to check every bill that you're giving me against a list of like
what they
hundreds of numbers.
Could have done was like, oh, you're depositing this amount of money. You put that in an envelope with the person's name and contact information, and then you just put it to the back for someone in the back
check it later
to go through. Like, have someone else doing that. That way you've at least got name attributed to the stack.
It was not a good system that they used. Between April and December of 1932, 25 ransom bills were reported at various banks. All of the leads from those were investigated and just turned up nothing. And it's thought that there were probably a lot more in circulation, but they just weren't being caught because
people weren't looking.
Bank tellers were not being paid enough to do the FBI's job.
Again, he's probably not depositing that money immediately, especially if it's the smaller bills. He's not depositing it directly to the bank. He's probably like laundering it through, you know, giving it to businesses or paying neighbors or employees, like, you know, paying the maid in cash with that kind of a thing. So
exactly. So eventually, President Roosevelt passed an executive order for everyone to turn in / exchange their gold certificates. He was like, we're done with the honor system. Turn them in after.
This is taking too long. Bring them here.
He essentially said after a certain date, it will be illegal for you to have gold certificates. You have to go turn them in. So when that happened, more reports came in, obviously, because now people are like, oh, I guess we have to get rid of what we have. And whenever they were able to trace like a person to the gold certificate, the general description that was given was pretty close to Cemetery John. So they're like, okay, we're onto something. This is great. And then in early 1934, ransom money just stopped showing up. And what they think is that the press was publishing what was going on, that there was a list of serial numbers and, you know, we're trying to track the kidnapper using money. And the kidnapper was like, well, I'm going to stop spending this money because it's suspicious. But then in September of that year, they started showing up again. They were small purchases. So you're right. He's not like taking them to the bank. And again, the general description that people were giving of the person spending this money was someone who looked like Cemetery John or had the same features, which kind of generic white guy to me.
That's what I was about to say too. I'm like, he seems like, like your average looking white
Especially
dude.
in the 30s. It's like, okay, a youngish guy with a face.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I mean, in the picture, he's wearing a hat, and like I know most men were wearing hats. So it's like you don't even really have a hair color or style, and so like men seem to all kind of dress the same back then. At least in all like the pictures and media I've seen.
Yeah.
So it's everyone kind of looks alike.
And I don't think that the one distinguishing feature he had, the lump on his finger, I don't think that was part of the public description. I think that was just something that Condon noticed and like kept to himself or whatever.
Could have been a temporary thing too. It could be, like how, like depending on the size of it, it could have been some sort of weird injury or, I don't know, a temporary, like it could have been a cyst or something.
Abscess or something. Okay. So on September 18th, 1934, so 2.5 years after the kidnapping took place, a bill turned up at the Corn Exchange Bank in the Bronx. Presumably they didn't exchange corn, but that's what it was called.
Oh, I have exciting news about corn.
Oh, tell me.
Walker now says the word corn.
Oh. Well,
we no longer go outside to play in the porn.
It's a little disappointing.
Yes and no. It was cute and it was funny, but like, we don't need to go out in public and talk about the porn.
The porn that you play with.
We play with our porn all the time.
Oh man.
So the porn exchange
bank has got a bill.
The POW still says boo though.
Oh, of course. We'll get there. It's fine.
I just think it's funny. He can say caw, caw.
And corn, apparently.
And now corn, but he can't say cow or cup. It's pow and puh.
Yeah. Maybe he's just said it for so long. He's like, it's not a cup, you idiot. It's a puh.
It's puh.
I've already determined the name for it.
But he can say stethoscope.
And utility truck. I think he really has a handle on the like, to me, the way he says utility truck is similar to how he says the cock-a-doodle-doo, where he's just like, utility truck. Like, he's got that
utility truck. Yeah, he said Hillary's name pretty well.
Wow.
And one of Shelton's techs, their name is Lily. Mm-hmm. And we were at the store yesterday morning, and she was working, and I talked to her for a second, and I was like, all right, say bye-bye, Lily. Bye-bye, Lily. Oh. And he said it perfectly. So, yeah, the L's, he's got down.
Yeah. Okay, so we're back at the Corn Exchange Bank. Mm-hmm. So they find this bill. Police go to investigate. The tellers were like, we didn't pay attention to who this
Do you know how many people we see a day?
Yeah, they're like, we don't have a description for you.
Also, this is, what, a year later now?
2.5 years
later. 2.5 years. Yeah. That's right. I don't know. Brain is.
Well, 2 years and some months.
After the initial kidnapping. Yes. So, like, the fever has, like, the press fever has died down. Like, the public is not really concerned that much with it right now.
It's like, oh, that thing that happened 2 years ago? We're still on that? We're still on that?
You haven't found that guy yet?
Yeah. Are we still supposed to be doing that?
Like, you guys should really get some people to help you investigate.
They're like, that's what you're supposed to be doing, bank tellers. Okay, so the bank tellers were like, no. They look at the bill, though, and there's something written in the margin. And it's the letter 4, U-13-41. And this is where I will give some credit to the cops, which I don't like to do. But one of them was like, that sounds like a license plate number. Maybe we should look and see if any gas stations made deposits here, because that's where you would see a lot of cars. So they look. There were 3 gas stations that made deposits that day. And one of them was a hit. It is Warner Quinn gas station in Upper Manhattan. They go there. They talk to the owner, whose name is Walter Lyle. And he's like, oh, yeah, I remember this bill. I wrote that in the margin. Let me tell you why.
Because this guy, the German accent and the fleshy lump on his hand, gave me this bill.
Yeah, so essentially he said this guy came in, paid for his gas with this gold certificate, and I remember that, you don't see a lot of these, and so I commented on it, and he said the man told him, I only have about 100 left. And when he drove away, Walter wrote down his license plate number because he's like, I don't know if this is like counterfeit or I don't like, I don't want to get in trouble. So I want to be able to trace this back to who gave it to me.
People were told to exchange them, meaning like just bring them to the bank.
Yeah.
Not still spend them at businesses.
Yeah, exactly.
Like obviously businesses are still going to take them because it is still money and like they can,
Yeah.
But like, again, that wasn't the intent when he was like, bring them in.
Yes. So, and he gave a description too, which was essentially, the match Cemetery John. It was about 32 years old, 5'11", 165 pounds, fair complexion, German. So police look up the license plate. It belongs to a 1930 Dodge, and it is registered to Bruno Richard Hauptmann. I meant to look up how to say his name. He's your next picture if you would like to look at him. He was 35 at the time, and he was a German immigrant, 5'10". He was 180 pounds with blonde hair and blue eyes.
So he's a little bit heavier, but like right in the middle on height of both Condon and the gas station.
Yeah.
Guy. Like, around 5'9", around 5'11". He's 5'10".
He's 5'10". Get it right.
But they were both said like 160, 170, 190. Which, I mean, I can't look at somebody and guess their weight.
I couldn't either. Honestly, people carry weight so differently. Yeah. Like, and also I would, like, if the police asked me, I'd be like, oh, I can't guess. Like, I don't want to, because, you're either going to, you could guess, 30 pounds heavier.
Does seem a bit wide around the middle there, but like literally wide, not like round.
Yeah.
He looks like his waist kind of comes out, but it could also just be the way his clothes are fitting on him. And like, because I was looking at some pictures that Shelton took of me and Critter the other day, and it's just kind of like the way I'm positioned and the clothes that I'm wearing are real big and baggy.
Yeah. That
it makes me look a lot bigger than I am.
Yeah.
Like I look kind of big, but then you look at my legs and they look a lot skinnier. And it's just like, wait, okay, it's too confusing. So, like...
So they track down Hauptmann. Richard.
Dick.
I have Hauptmann written in whatever. They track Richard down. They find his house. They kind of stake out his house because they don't want to arrest him there.
Well, they don't have any reason to arrest him yet. They just have to, like, watch him.
True, but it's the 30s.
Okay, fair.
Well, what they do is they wait for him to leave, they follow him, and then they just pull him over and arrest him. So when they pull him over, they found a gold certificate in his wallet that when they checked it, turned out to be ransom money. And Richard told them when they were like, what are you doing with this? He said, oh, I've been collecting them because I was worried about inflation. He was worried, I guess, I know that after World War I in Germany, like the economy tanked. Yeah. And he had lived through that. And so he's like, I didn't know if that was going to happen here. You guys are kind of going through something. So like I was collecting these kind of like for insurance for myself. But he's like, but that's the last one I have. I don't have any more. And they're like, that's weird because you definitely told that gas station guy that you had 100 of them. So they take him back to his house and they search his house. They don't really find anything there their first time around. His landlady tells them that he had paid rent with gold certificates as early as 9 months ago, which would be in January. And that he had also just recently paid for part of this month's rent with gold certificates. And she showed them, she still had it. Mm-hmm. She showed it to him and it was ransom money. So they're like, all right, you're hella suspicious. We are keeping you.
It's one thing to have one bill of ransom money because there was a lot of bills and it's been a long time and money just moves.
Yep.
but it's less likely to have this many bills.
Yeah, multiple.
And all at one time.
Yeah.
You might have had this many, like, naturally throughout 2 years, but...
Yeah. And to be German and to match this description.
Well, also to just be German is probably a mark against you right
there. So they arrest Richard and his wife, Anna. Poor Anna throughout this whole thing. She thankfully was released pretty quickly because they questioned her and were like, okay, it's pretty obvious you don't know what's going on, or, you know, you're not involved. So during their interrogation of Richard, they find out he was born in Saxony, Germany in 1899. He trained as a carpenter's apprentice for a year. He worked as a machinist for 3 years, which those were both part of the psychological profile, I think. He served in World War I, and he came to America in 1923 as a stowaway. Police are able to trace several of the purchases made with the ransom money back to Richard. He denied, like, being involved at all. Mm-hmm. So he said he didn't know Condon. He didn't know anyone who worked at the cemetery. Like, he obviously knew where they were, but, like, he's like, I don't know anyone who works there. I haven't been there. He said he didn't remember anything from March 1st of 1932, which, why would you? Like, that's put in there as, like, an incriminating thing. I'm like, that was 2 years ago on a date that was very random to him.
I can't even remember what happened March 1st 2 years ago. I know what happened March 8th and 9th 2 years ago. But that's about it.
Yeah, and, like, I feel like you can kind of guess based on... do you need this?
No, I accidentally pulled it down.
Oh, okay.
So just push it back.
But yeah, I feel like we've talked about this before, or someone has talked about it before, of, like, when you're questioning people about something several months or several years ago, unless something specific, like, unless you're, like, obviously the Lindberghs remember that day because something very traumatic and significant happened. But anyone else, if they're not involved, you cannot take the fact that they don't remember as a sign of guilt, because no one remembers that day.
No. I mean, I could be like, okay, let's see, March 2 years ago, I know that, like, I can remember a handful of things that happened, kind of a thing, but I can't tell you if this happened on the 3rd or the 16th or the 28th.
Yeah.
Like, it happened in March.
Yeah. And, like, I feel like the best you could do, like, if someone asked me, like, what were you doing this day last year? Or, you know...
what were you doing on the night of, you know, at 9 p.m. on the night of October 19th?
Yeah, you could be like, well, that was, like, a Tuesday, so I would probably went to work. Like, I probably went to work. Based on what I normally do, I probably got out around this time. I probably went to the gym. I'm saying probably because this is what I do now, but I could not tell you any specifics. I can just tell you what my normal routine would have been. So he's normal. He doesn't remember 2.5 years ago. Police then give him some paper and they're like, you have to write some stuff down because we need handwriting samples. So they give him a paragraph with phrases from the ransom note. And they made him write for several hours because they thought that he might be trying to disguise his handwriting. And they thought the longer he writes, the more tired he gets, the more natural his handwriting will be. So he's just having to, like, repeat this. It goes on until 8 a.m.
Also, they shouldn't give him something to copy verbatim, too. They should be like, okay, write down what I'm saying and, like, say some of the phrases and whatnot and look for some of the misspellings.
Yeah, because there's also a lot of debate, because he would later claim that they told him to misspell certain words. They told him how to spell them. And they obviously deny that. But because the letter has so many specific misspellings, that is kind of important to, like, did you tell him to misspell it this way? Did he naturally misspell it this way? He knows why he's writing these things down.
If he's literally copying from a paper that they've given him.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they intentionally misspelled it on that paper for him. And so he's just like, I will copy word for word, letter for letter.
Yeah.
even though this isn't spelled correctly.
Well, remember with William Hirons when they told him to recreate the ransom note, and so he wrote it the way that he remembered it, which included misspellings and like a backwards ampersand or something. And then they're like, aha, we've got you. And he's like, I think I misunderstood the instructions. I thought you were telling me to recreate this, not to just write so it's not great. And then also he's doing this until 8 a.m. So like presumably at least 8 hours, I would think. I don't know when he started, but eventually he refuses to do anymore and is like, I'm going to go to sleep for a little bit.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, police search his house again. They search his house and his garage. They find a toolbox in the garage that was allegedly missing a 3/4 inch wood chisel, which was the size that they found. It's unclear if he had like a set of chisels and the 3/4 one was missing, or if it's like, well, we didn't find a 3/4 inch chisel, so obviously
I think if they
missing.
say it was missing, I feel like he probably had a couple of chisels of various sizes, whether they were like an actual set or he had just bought chisels on multiple occasions for different sizes and he just didn't have that one. Because I can't imagine someone going to someone's toolbox and there's not a single chisel in there and being like, he's missing a chisel. Like, no, I'm not missing a chisel. I've never had a chisel.
Yeah, exactly. They also find a notebook that had some drawings in it that were part of a ladder that was similar to the ladder. Then they start finding like hidden compartments in the garage. So in one, they find $1,830 in gold certificates, all of which were ransom money. Under a floorboard, hidden in an old can stuffed with rags, they found $11,930 in ransom money. So the total that they have found so far is $13,760 in ransom bills, which is more than a coincidence at this point.
Yeah, no. You're not going to get those naturally. Like that came in the ransom box. Yes. You took the box from Condon.
Yes. So they confront him.
Whether you were the kidnapper or just some person who sent in a note.
Yeah.
Got yourself put in. No.
Yeah. So they confront him with this. They're like, hey, Richard, we found $13,000 worth of ransom money in your garage. Can you explain this? So Richard says,
not just found it in your garage. Hidden. It's very hidden.
Yeah.
Like, you said stuffed in a can with rags, like, and that was under the floorboard. So, like, that was hidden.
Yeah. So what Richard says, he says, well, I had this business partner named Isidore Fish, and he left for Germany in December of 1933, and before he left, he gave me some items for safekeeping, and one of them was a shoebox. And he's like, I didn't know it was in it. I put it on a shelf in my pantry. We had a bad leak at some point and the box got wet. So I opened it to see like if whatever had been ruined, and I found all this money. And he's like, the thing is that Fish wasn't a great business partner. He cheated me out of $7,000 one time. So I felt like I was entitled to at least $7,000 worth of this money. So I hid it to keep it safe, but also like, that's why I've been spending it because I felt like
I took my share and put the rest away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well that explains the shoebox. What about the can of money and rags?
I think his implication was that the reason he was hiding any money at all was because he was trying to keep it safe. I don't know.
Even safe from himself. Like, I'm only allowed this much. Yeah. The rest of it is not mine. I'm not going to be the bad guy.
It's like the envelope system. And this Isidore Fish guy was not alive anymore. He had died in March of that year of tuberculosis. And Richard was like, they're like, well, you told us that you just had the one. You know, why did you lie to us? What's going on? And he's like, listen, I was scared to tell you that I had hidden money in my garage because I knew that would look bad, A. And also, I feel like I was entitled to that $7,000 and I didn't want you to take it from me. So
Fair.
I mean, fair. So while he's in custody, they bring in the cab driver who had delivered one of the ransom notes to Condon, and he identified Richard as the person who gave him the note. And then around 5 p.m., so it's now like the 20th, so it's the day after he's been arrested, and he's, been up all night. They bring in Condon to look at him in a lineup. So they're like, you're the only one who really sat and saw this guy. You're the one who gave us the description in the first place. We're going to have you look at a lineup and tell us if you recognize anyone. So they put Richard in a lineup. And mind you, Richard looks probably how he looked in that mugshot. So he's like disheveled. He's sleep deprived. He probably has a 5 o'clock shadow at this point. They put him in a lineup with 13 plainclothes officers who are all clean shaven, well dressed, pressed shirts, etc. And they're like, oh, do you see anyone you recognize here? So Condon is like a very weird person. Seems like the most annoying person in the world.
Yeah. Well, that whole self-important nonsense.
Yeah. So he is interrogating everyone. He's making them do things, and the police are like, oh my gosh, just tell us if you see someone. We've made it very easy for you.
It's but he has to make a big production out of it.
Yes.
Really make himself feel important. And,
yes.
Insert himself in this investigation as much as possible.
Literally inserted himself into the situation. So he singles out 4 people and makes them step forward. He looks at everyone's hands. So according to Hauptmann's Ladder, which is the book I read that showed the picture, the book that I have a little bit of a grudge against. According to that book, Richard had some kind of anomaly on his thumb, quote, caused by a well-developed muscle in that area. The author of Cemetery John, which is this other book that I read, good grief, he says, no, Richard didn't have any kind of lump on his thumb. That's just not true. So I don't know which is the truth. But Condon singles out Richard from the 4 that he's already singled out. He's asking him all these questions. He's like, didn't you see me in the cemetery? Didn't you hand me money? Didn't we talk? And Richard's like, no, I've never seen you before in my life. I don't know what you're talking about. And the police are like, okay, do you see John here? The guy that we have called John. Do you see him? And Condon is like, no, I don't. He said, well, this guy comes the closest to matching the description of anyone else here in the lineup, but I'm not going to positively ID him as the person that I saw and talked to.
Okay.
So police are like, well, get out then. We were kind of hoping for a slam dunk here. So Richard is arraigned without bail, so he gets to stay in police custody. So fun.
Oh boy.
He claims that after his arraignment, the police beat him with a hammer. Okay. A medical exam would dispute that a hammer was used, but did find bruising that indicated he had been roughed
If
up.
he's been beaten with a hammer, hammer would do some serious damage.
Gonna, break some bones.
Yes.
So it's
serious damage.
I think the consensus was okay, you probably weren't hit with a hammer, but we do believe you that the cops
you were beat with something. You were brutalized in some way.
Yes.
It just
which
not with a hammer.
I hate that at that time. I mean, okay.
We're not saying it's okay. We're just saying we're just getting into the semantics here.
Yeah.
We believe that you were beaten and that's not cool.
Right.
Just
but there's also
a hammer.
Yeah. Well, and it's I hate that at that time you couldn't be or you couldn't point out the very logical thing of okay, I get that you're mad, police, but also you beating him kind of is going to negate the whole case because you're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Like, you can't do that. It's like when you see police brutality today and it's like, people will be like, oh, well, this person was speeding and then they back-talked the officer. And it's like, okay, but you still can't shoot someone for that. Like, I get that you might be mad and feel disrespected. You as a police officer cannot hurt that person just because you're mad at them. Okay, so police are doing another search of the house. Like, they're still, I don't know if they're doing another one.
Warrants be damned.
Yeah.
Or maybe they have them. I don't know.
Who knows? So they find a few things that don't look great for Richard. So inside his bedroom closet, they find this series of whatever. They find 2974 Decatur 3-7154 Sedgwick written on the wall. They also find a bunch of a series of numbers written on the wall in another place. So 2974 Decatur was Condon's address, and the 3-7154 Sedgwick, I guess, was a phone number. Was Condon's phone number before he had to change his number because of the press or whatever, but that had been his number at the time of all of this. So it's like, okay, that's weird. And then they go into the attic. And they find that a floorboard has been cut short and removed. So they're like, okay, that's weird. And then in the garage, they find $840 in ransom money in another place, as well as a loaded pistol. But I have it described here as the tiniest loaded pistol, because please look at the picture I gave you. When they said they found a loaded pistol, I thought a regular size gun.
A handgun.
Please look at this picture.
Oh. I've actually seen a gun that small before.
Really?
Yeah.
I laughed so hard when I saw this picture because I was like, that you have to use maybe 2 fingers to hold that. That is the tiniest little baby gun I've ever seen in my life. If a gun could be cute, it's there.
Yep.
So...
Actually, the one I saw might have been like a hair bigger, but it was definitely like that small, like fit in the palm of your hand.
Good grief. Well, anyways, they find those things and they come back to the station. They're like, hey, Richard, we found some more stuff. Love to hear your explanation for it. So the writing on the wall, Richard was like, well, I was following the case and I probably either read the address in the paper or I heard it and I wrote it down.
Yeah. I read a lot of things. I don't copy down for no reason.
Well, the only thing that I find credible about that is that the other numbers they found on the wall turned out to be completely unrelated to anything or about the case.
I was about to say, to this case.
Yeah, to the case. But I was like, well, isn't that kind of proof that he is like just a weird person that writes? Because I was like, why are you writing on the inside of your closet wall? But if he's also just writing random notes there...
Well, also compare that handwriting to the writing sample that he provided and to the ransom notes. Like, compare all 3.
Yes, true. So, that's his explanation. He's like, I just probably read it and wanted to remember it, so I wrote it on my closet wall, like everyone does.
No one does that. Especially, like, nobody writes that kind of a detail down, because, like...
Yeah,
so,
why would you?
I know, so I can't remember how much personal information Condon put in his letter to the press. Mm-hmm. But he didn't put his address in there, right?
I'm sure the press printed it at some point.
Oh, yeah, because up until, like, far too recently, people were, like, oh, Miss Ann Jones of 1311, Mason Street.
Was assaulted the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love they mention that all the time in the Pastimes, the other podcast that the Dollop does where they read old newspapers.
Yeah.
Because it'll be a paper from the 1920s or whatever, and it'll be exactly that. It'll be like, this person was assaulted in their home. Here's the address.
Go do it again.
Where they live. And it's like, Dude, I think they did that up into the 70s.
Yeah, like I said, it's far too recently.
It's insane.
That they were printing this information for everyone to see.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know if... Because, I mean, he wrote it as a letter, and it wasn't an article about Condon. Because, you know, that's... Right. You know, when we're talking about that, we're talking about, you know, so-and-so of this address, here's the story.
Yeah.
This was more of a letter to the editor thing, where... When those get sent in, they just get published as is. There's no intro. There's no, you know, extra info. It's their letter, and then they're signed their name, unless he put his own address on there. But I thought that, you know, he sent that letter to be published because they were communicating via the newspaper at that time.
Yeah, it's unclear, but, like, I have no doubt that the press probably in the last 2 years published
his address.
Condon's address.
And I guess his phone... Well, he did publish his phone number, or it... I don't know.
I don't know. Who knows? I'm sure it was published, because he had to change it at one point. So they bring in Kohler, our wood expert, who is probably still looking for other lumber yards. And they're like, can you look at this floorboard in the attic? Because it looks like a piece is missing. And he was like, yep, this is that handrail I was looking at. So the holes matched with, like, the joists on the floor. The angle of the nails was perfect. The grain matched. Well, let me tell you, this book I read spent way too long. Like, every other chapter, they'd be like, and this is how we can prove that it can't. I know. You just have to say that, like, Kohler looked at it and everything matched. Yeah. And we have proven that
we trust Kohler.
Like, that piece of the ladder came from Richard's attic. We got it. You don't have to run through all of the details every time you say that.
See, to me, you know, like, okay, yeah, maybe the story about the business partner with the money. Okay, maybe. You know, and like, oh, all right, yeah, it's weird, but maybe you did just, like, maybe you're just a, you know, like a true crime aficionado, and, like, you like following it, and for some reason, you know, you just wanted to remember that person's address, because if you ever found yourself out and about in that area, you could be like, oh, hey, that's where that guy lives.
Yeah.
Sure, maybe, still weird,
but
maybe, like, doesn't necessarily, no, the fact that a part of your attic floorboard, it's not like you had a whole bunch of lumber in the backyard that somebody just came and stole and used. No, nobody's coming into your attic, ripping up part of your floorboards and using that to make a ladder. That's
no, like, besides all of the ransom money, this is, like, the most incriminating piece of evidence that they have found, where it's like, okay, we're 99% sure that you made the ladder, at least. So they also now have handwriting experts who are looking at the samples that they are providing.
And it's just way too weird of a coincidence that, you know, if you made a ladder for your friend or whatever, it's way too weird that you made a ladder for somebody and also have the ransom money.
Yeah.
And have also been interested in the case to the point where, like, you're so interested in the details of the case that you've written things on the wall. See, to me, somebody writing on the wall, like, address or phone number, sounds like someone who was on the phone and didn't have a notepad in front of them and just wrote it on the wall to remember.
That actually is a good point. I didn't even think of that. That's smart. Maybe take a lot of phone calls in the closet. Privacy.
He didn't want Anne finding out. That's his wife, right? Anna,
yes. So they bring in handwriting experts, and we have a father and son team, and their name is Albert Osborne. I know. So Albert S. Osborne is the father, and Albert D. Osborne is the son. I don't know. So they compared the samples with the ransom notes. I think your next picture is a side-by-side comparison of, it's a very small sample, but It's what we got. Nope, just kidding. Skip that. Don't look.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, so allegedly, Albert the Younger called police at 4 a.m. the day after Richard was arrested and, quote, expressed reservations about the handwriting samples. Albert Sr., the older, called later that afternoon around 3:30, and he said, "Oh, I've concluded. I've done these comparisons. I am very confident that the handwriting samples that you gave me match the ransom note." And then 30 minutes after that, Albert the Younger calls again and is like, "Oh, I agree with my dad, actually. I agree with what he says." So it's a little...
I don't know if I agree. I mean, if only seeing those three, one of them is very, very similar. The other two are similar, but like, I don't know, there's something about the R in one of the words that I'm like...
And they're
similar, but like that seems like distinctly different enough that...
Yeah.
But then again, every time I write letters, they're different.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a bunch of other samples that to me didn't look similar, and I picked the one purposefully that looked the most similar to show you, because part of me thinks handwriting evidence is compelling, but like there's also...
It can't be your only thing.
Yeah.
Like, you can have this as like, we have all this other evidence and this. Like, just add it to the pile.
Yeah.
But you need more, you need a missing floorboard.
Yeah, exactly. And
tiny smoking gun.
The tiniest smoking gun. The author of this other book, which I'm going to reference him in a second, he had like I think it was like some program that analyzed handwriting, which I'm like, yeah, today we should have like AI doing this. Maybe not, but like we should be able to design a computerized program that can like...
I think there is.
Whatever. But like even then it's still like circumstantial. Like your handwriting could just very coincidentally be similar.
Well, and part of it too is like with the handwriting, it's not just how it looks, it's how certain things are formed. So like yes, you might draw a D 6 times and each one looks a little different from from one to the other, but they're all like, they all have the same kind of uptick there or something. And like, the curve might be a little wonky here and a little different there or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's not so much the way it looks, but the way it's formed. And they look at like certain letters.
Yeah.
More so than like words altogether. Anyway,
yeah.
I just remember there's a couple of episodes of Forensic Files that they've had handwriting analysis.
Yeah. Okay. So several days after this, Charles Lindbergh comes to the police station disguised as a detective, which I think is hilarious. I'm like, sir, you have the most distinctive chin in the world.
Also, detectives like
look like regular people.
Yeah, they're just regular people. How do you get...
I think like, he was wearing
sunglasses. I'm disguised as a detective right now.
I think he was wearing sunglasses and just like standing amongst the detectives, just like not drawing attention to himself. So they bring Richard in and they make him shout, "Hey, doctor," several times. Because the night of the ransom exchange, when Lindbergh was waiting in the car, Condon was like looking around trying to find the guy he was supposed to meet. And the John, whatever, yelled, "Hey, doctor," to get his attention. And Lindbergh heard that. Mind you, that is the only thing he heard was just that phrase.
And 2 years ago.
2 years ago. But Charles Lindbergh positively identified Richard's voice as the one he heard that night. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation about whether he could have, whether it was even possible for him to have remembered or recognized a voice that he heard 2 words of them saying, and it being over 2 years ago.
Like, again, I know that, like, the night of a ransom drop, that would be another night that you would remember. Like, that's another, but like, stick in your memory banks. And, like, you'd remember a lot of details. But at the same time, that's 2 years, and that's an auditory memory.
And remember how we talked about, like, every time, it's like the more you think of something, it changes just a little bit every time you think of it. And it's like, how much has he been thinking of this one thing?
Our control freak, he's replayed that night over and over and over again in his mind.
And, like, here's a person with a German accent saying that, and it's like, so, like, I think the consensus was, like, he wasn't lying because he probably did think that he recognized it. He wanted to recognize it.
I 100% think that he believes that.
Yeah.
And he could be right. Like, it could be him.
But it was stupid of them to bring him in anyway.
I just think it's
it wasn't
unlikely that his memory is as accurate as that.
Yeah,
2 weeks ago, sure, maybe. Yeah.
But
maybe. like 2 words.
Yeah. And I'm sure he insisted on
it
being brought in.
It took Connor several minutes and several words to realize that
he was talking
he was talking to both of us, not just you.
Yeah. To be fair, though, when I listen to us,
we do sound similar.
I think we sound similar.
I don't think we sound similar in real life.
No, I don't. But... like, I feel like I could pick your voice out, you know, from a bunch of others. But when I hear it recorded, because my voice sounds different to me.
Yeah, mine too.
I'm like, we sound pretty similar.
Yeah.
Okay, so on October 9th, 1934, Bruno Richard Hauptmann was indicted for the murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. And they had to play a little bit...
Not the kidnapping?
Well...
Okay.
They have to play a little bit of legal gymnastics. Because at the time, in New Jersey, kidnapping was not a felony crime. Kidnapping and transporting that person across state lines was, but just kidnapping was not. And if someone died, so if someone died accidentally during the commission of a felony, you can charge the person committing the felony with felony murder, which is punishable by execution. But, like, they don't have that. They have someone dying because they think their best chance is that he died by accident.
Yeah.
But what they have right now is someone committing a misdemeanor and someone dies, and that is manslaughter.
I was about to say, it's just manslaughter.
Yeah. But they're like, we want him on felony murder. So what was a felony was burglary, essentially. So they charged him with breaking and entering with the intent to steal the baby's clothes. And while he was in the process of stealing the clothes...
he just took the baby with him.
Well,
and don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Or with the bedclothes.
Or the bedclothes.
So, that's what they have him on. One author did point out that they had plenty of evidence to send him away for life, like, even separate of the kidnapping charge. So, they had him on entering the United States illegally... illegal
wondering
possession.
If that was gonna play a role, because I'm like, okay, well, he entered illegally, and I'm assuming maybe since they're not going after him for that, at least right away.
Yeah,
it's like, is his wife a citizen? And
she was, I think.
And so he still has to, like, get registered and whatnot. Like, you can't just marry someone and be like, haha, I'm a citizen now. Like, no, there's a whole process.
Yeah. They have him on that. They have illegal possession of a tiny weapon, hoarding gold certificates, which was illegal, and also extortion. They have enough to at least tie him to enough ransom money to say, you extorted this money from Colonel Lindbergh.
From somebody.
And so he almost certainly would have received a life sentence for all of that combined. But they very clearly were saying, life in jail is not good enough. We want you to be put to death. Right. So they played that game.
Well, also, I know there's some things like, you know, you can't be tried for the same crime twice kind of a thing. So it's like, okay, well, let's try for just this one. And that way, if we don't fail, we've got this as a backup.
Yeah. So if they weren't able to convict him of this felony murder, they could go back and try him for all of those other things and probably get him put away for life. So he's been indicted. I want to briefly now tell you about a man named John Knoll.
The picture I saw.
The picture that you saw. So John Knoll was a German immigrant living in the South Bronx. He immigrated in 1925, legally, presumably. And eventually he found work as a deli clerk, which is important. He was 5'7" and 167 pounds. And per a 1936 photo, which is not the one, I actually have it in the book. That's why I brought the book. Just go to the place where it's bookmarked. All right. Per this picture, yes.
I'm not going to see the picture, am I?
Well, yeah, but I'm about to tell you what it is anyways.
No, I meant
no. That's not the book that has it in there.
I like this picture.
Yeah, right? I hate those bookmarks. So this picture plus the recollections of one of his nieces, John had a, quote, fleshy mass at the base of his left thumb. It is hard to see in that picture.
Yeah, especially in this lighting too.
Yeah. The author of that book had a hand surgeon enlarge the photo and examine it. And the hand surgeon said, yeah, he's got something weird going on with his left.
I can kind of see a little bit of, like, odd shape to it.
Yeah, and I think that is the only picture where you can see really the best. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I couldn't find it on the internet anywhere, so I brought my book in. It's going to stay there on the floor. It's fine. Okay. John was also an alcoholic. He was described by his second wife's family as, quote, harsh, controlling, and unfaithful. He probably was abusive. His first marriage lasted only a few months, and his second wife eventually would stay in Germany with her child while he came back to the United States. And I think the way her family described it was she would rather live in Nazi-controlled Germany than with him, because it's the mid to late 30s. Mm-hmm. Outwardly, he appeared considerate, friendly, and charming, but he was known to
behind closed doors.
Behind closed doors. He was known to be secretive, impulsive, unpredictable, demeaning, and lacking empathy. In 1931, a kid named Gene Zorn, who is the father of the guy who wrote that book.
I was about to say, I'm like, I recognize that last name.
Yeah. So Gene was 15 in 1931, and he was neighbors with John, and John had, like, I don't want to say taken an interest in him, because that, I'm not trying to stick up for John, but, like, I don't think it was that kind of weird thing. He had, like, taken him...
An innocent interest.
Yes.
He was just a nice young kid that lived next door that he probably saw some positive thing in, like...
Yes. They were out one day, and during this outing, Gene overheard John talking to two other German men. They were talking in German, so Gene didn't understand them, but he heard John call one of the men Bruno, and he recognized the word Inglewood, which Inglewood is the name of the Morrow's estate. And Bruno is Richard's first name, if you didn't remember that.
I did.
Okay.
Took me a second, but I was like, wait. But yeah.
Yeah. So that is the whole reason that he is, like, a person of interest to us, or how he, like, came on the radar. Mm-hmm. In 1932, right around April, which is when the money got exchanged, John appeared to have come into some money himself. So Gene and John, one of the things that they had in common was they were into stamp collecting. And around April, Gene remembers that John began collecting and gifting to him some really rare, really expensive stamps. Mm. And he knew in the past that John had been pretty frugal because he works as a deli clerk. He's not making a lot of money.
And he's probably spending a lot of his money on booze.
Yeah. So it does not make sense that he is suddenly buying kind of expensive things.
Rare collectibles.
Yeah. At the end of 1935, so around the time of 1935, 1934, whatever, around the time Richard was arrested, I might have that date wrong, John sailed back to Germany on a luxury liner. Round trip tickets would have cost about $700 each which I didn't do that conversion, but it did say it was about 5 times his yearly rent. So take whatever your mortgage is, multiply it by 5, and tell me if you want to spend that on a ticket.
No.
To cross the ocean.
No.
No. A couple interesting facts about John. Some of the circulating bills that had been found were found to have stains on them that turned out to be animal fats, which if you worked in a deli, you would have that on your hands. The sleep suit, when it was mailed to Condon, was mailed using a 10-cent stamp, which was very unusual, like just not something you would normally see. John had a huge stamp collection, so...
All right. Were stamps only like 5 cents then?
Well, I think it was like one of those things where you have to like kind of add stamps to get to the correct postage. Mm-hmm. And I think just a 10-cent stamp was like not something that you normally saw.
Okay. I'll just take your word for it.
I'm taking some other people's word for it. So modern analysis of John's handwriting. So this guy, Gene's son, whatever. They did the modern version of handwriting analysis. It indicated that John's handwriting matched some of the ransom note writing, which again, similar, matched. I feel like it's a little subjective.
Yeah.
And someone pointed out that if John did have some of the ransom money, which 2/3 of it was still unaccounted for, he could have, in theory, taken it to Germany and exchanged it for German currency, and then just that would have kept it out of U.S. circulation.
Right.
Which would be a very effective way of laundering that money if you needed to.
Turn it into German banks. They don't have the serial numbers.
They're not looking for that. Exactly. Okay, so that's John Knoll. He is not on anyone's radar. We just have Richard. Richard's been indicted. He pleads not guilty. The trial is set for January 2nd, 1935. And a few weeks after his arraignment, he and Anna fire his original lawyer because they just got like a cheap lawyer.
Public defender kind of a thing.
And they hire Edward J. Riley, the Bull of Brooklyn.
Ooh.
And the reason they were able to do this
is the Ox of the Bronx.
That would have been really good. They had 2 reporters from the New York Journal who had approached Anna, at least, and offered to pay for a more expensive lawyer in exchange for exclusives from Anna, which seems really unethical, but I don't know.
I mean, to get the inside scoop on like with this huge case, that would sell newspapers.
That would. Yeah.
Like, and what they would make in those, by selling those newspapers would more than cover the cost of this lawyer,
yes.
I'm sure.
Yes. I just feel like journalistic ethics maybe were
bent. No, the integrity is not there.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, by today's standards, absolute no. But then again, we all have to suffer clickbait.
True.
Articles. Mm-hmm. So, like, and I feel like that goes against journalistic integrity, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree.
So, just on a much smaller, less insulting scale than this.
But still. Sellouts. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, by the way, if anyone wants an extremely detailed account of the trial, you can read Hauptmann's Ladder. Skip that one page I told you about. It will tell you what happened every single day of the trial. Because I love you guys, read that and have summarized for you because it was really boring. Okay, so the prosecution, the essentials of what the prosecution brought. They had looked into Richard's background, and they found out that he had a criminal record in Germany. He had been charged with burglary, armed robbery, theft, and receiving stolen goods. Not a good look if you were trying to convince U.S. authorities that you were not involved in this crime that
you did not break into, steal a baby,
and receive
money. Nor, like, even if he didn't do the first couple of things, mm-hmm. he has still received that money.
Yep.
That was illegal.
Yes.
That ransom money. He's still in possession of Yeah. Maybe not stolen.
Extorted goods.
Extorted goods.
Yeah. Because I've now have a personal goal to tie in an actual Alcatraz fact into every episode. What am I supposed to do? Or not a fact, but like throwback. He escaped jail twice because of course he did. He also allegedly tried...
In Germany or here?
In Germany. Okay. Allegedly he tried... They found like a spoon that had been sharpened into like a shiv, indicating that he was trying to escape but didn't in the U.S. Okay. So his most recent jail break was in June of 1932. I wrote that wrong. His most recent one, he fled to the United States.
Gotcha. He got out of jail and went straight to America.
Yes, he stowed away on a ship and came here. So he's technically a German fugitive. That definitely didn't happen in 1932. Sorry. I wrote these notes wrong. Okay, so they have his criminal background. They also bring a couple witnesses. They bring a guy named Millard Whited, who was a farmer who owned property near the Sauerland estate. He testified that he had seen a suspicious man near the estate on 2 separate occasions in February of 1932, and he picked Richard out of a lineup and was like, that's him. However, in April of 1932, right after the crime, he said that he had not seen anyone. And later, when his background was like looked into, it was like he was like a known liar. Essentially, he was an unreliable witness. But that was not brought up at trial. Neither of those two things were. They have another witness, Mr. Hawkmuth is what we're going to call him because my notes auto-corrected his first name. This is an 87-year-old man who testified that he had seen Richard in a green car with a ladder in the back on March 1st of 1932. It was later determined, via medical reports, that Mr. Hawkmuth had, quote, failing eyesight due to cataracts. Apparently or allegedly, his daughter also told reporters later that he hadn't seen anything, but neither of those points were brought up during trial. Charles and Anna Lindbergh both testified. Charles identified Richard's voice, like, for the record. Anna, I think, was just identifying, like, the clothing and there to tell what happened. Condon testified and very dramatically identified Richard as Cemetery John.
That man right there.
I think that's essentially what it was. And when the defense challenged him and was like,
yeah, but you refused to positively ID him at the lineup, the very extensive lineup.
Yeah. They essentially said that Condon, again, the most annoying person in the world, played technicalities with them. He said there was a difference between identifying Richard and declaring an identification. He said that he had identified him in his mind, but he had refused to declare his identification to the police. He's like, oh, I knew then that it was him. I just didn't declare the identification to police.
Why? Because he wanted to make the dramatic declaration here in court.
Later in his book,
of course he has a book.
He said that he recognized that it was like an unfair lineup, which it was, and
it was all police officers.
Yeah.
So like he couldn't have
it's not like you could.
It was like it has to be him.
Yeah, but I'm like, okay, if you get, because he was trying to play himself as like, I was looking out for the suspect's best interest by refusing to do this because it was unfair.
Well, I think he refused to do it because he's like, I'm pretty sure it's this guy, but if I say it's this guy and it's not him because it's an officer or like they know for sure it's not him, then I'll look like I don't remember and I'll look wrong.
Yeah, he wanted the police to have more evidence and be pretty sure.
Basically, he wanted to have a winning bet.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yes. The prosecution also called several handwriting experts, including the Osbornes, who identified Richard's handwriting as matching that of ransom notes. They pointed out, which I thought this was interesting, that Richard made similar spelling errors in his personal writings. So they had collected, like, when they went through his house, regular natural writings. So, like, his checks and his account books, he had a habit of putting the in the wrong place in words. Mm-hmm. that could maybe just be like a German, like a English isn't my first language. Maybe a lot of people make that mistake. But it was, to me, that's like more compelling than handwriting experts saying that handwriting matches. Is if you have a similar pattern of misspelling things.
Yeah, to me it's more like your syntax and whatnot. Your syntax, your spelling, your grammar, all of that.
Yeah.
Is more telling than the actual physical handwriting. But I think the handwriting does play a role. Again, like, it's interesting. It can be compelling. It cannot be your only... it cannot be your smoking gun. That cannot be your main piece of evidence.
Yes. If anything, it's a tiny smoking gun.
That is a side dish.
Yes.
Not the main course.
Obviously, they presented the ladder. They went into so much detail about how they knew the ladder came from the wood in his attic.
Did get our wood guy on the stand?
They did. He testified extensively.
Probably took up the whole morning, him going through like, well, first I did this, and then I was like, well, it's this kind of wood. So I figured based on these things, it had to have come from this mill. And then so this mill shipped to these lumber yards, and I looked at these lumber yards.
Yes, exactly. That was exactly what it was.
I mean, no hate to the wood guy, like, respect.
He's living his best life.
He's a wood nerd, and like love him for it.
Exactly.
He's got his passion, and I'm happy for him.
And congratulations to us, because we didn't make a single wood joke. You're welcome. They also pointed out that Richard had quit his job the day after the ransom money had been paid, and that his wealth had increased since then, despite not having... Anna worked, but like he was not bringing in any money. So on April 2nd of 1932, his total assets were valued at $4,941.40, which is about $114,000. And then the day after his arrest, September 9th of 1934, his total assets were valued at $56,000, or $56,059.65, which is about $1.3 million.
And that is 2 years after the fact.
Yes.
And that's potentially, maybe he and this John Knoll character were partners, or maybe John Knoll had, like, maybe he was paid to, help out once or twice.
Yeah.
And so he got a portion of the ransom money, but not all of it.
Yeah. It's definitely suspicious. He tried to say that he played the stock markets, which he did, but they looked into it and they're like, you actually lost money in the stock market. So there's that. In their closing arguments, the prosecutor attacked Richard's character, which is illegal today. I don't know if it was illegal then. They also possibly tried to play on the anti-German sentiments of the jury because it's 1934. They claimed that Richard appealing his extradition, he'd been extradited. Thank you. Extradited from New Jersey to New York because there was like can't not think of the word. There was a issue, whatever. He had to be extradited. So they said because he appealed that was evidence of his guilt because he fought it so hard. That is also kind of illegal because what he was doing was exercising a constitutional right. And
was it something about he lived somewhere, but the crime was committed somewhere else, and so in order to be tried in the state of the crime,
I think it was
extradited there.
The ransom exchange happened in New York, and the kidnapping and murder happened in New Jersey.
Okay.
And so
maybe that was it.
Yeah, I think it was like they could try him for extortion in New York, but they needed to get him back to New Jersey to get the murder charge.
Gotcha.
Anyways, you exercising a constitutional right cannot be used to allege or insinuate guilt. So essentially, if someone is like pleading the fifth, you can't say
like, he's guilty because he doesn't want to answer the question.
Yeah, you can't do that. You have to let people exercise their rights.
The maid took her own life. She must
be guilty.
That makes me mad still.
Yeah.
Like not even so much that they're assuming guilt to that, but the fact that she was harassed so horrendously that she felt that was her only option and escape.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm sure that, you know, even if they were like, okay, we're gonna stop questioning you eventually, or like, even if nothing further came of it, you know, like, her reputation's gonna be ruined. Like, who's gonna hire her now? Like, no other wealthy person's gonna hire her to be a maid because she may have been involved in the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Yeah, or she was heavily implied to have been, at least.
Yeah, she was questioned multiple times. Like, we don't want a maid like that working for us. So, like, her life was basically over.
Yeah.
At least that's how she probably saw it.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. The prosecution also said they had to, quote, go up and down the line to induce the gentleman, meaning Richard, who said he was innocent to come over here and prove it. Essentially, again, saying, like, well, we had to, like, go jump through all these hoops to get him, and he's claiming that he's innocent, but he won't come over here and prove it. It's not on the defense.
The burden of proof is on the prosecution.
Yeah, so essentially, you're innocent until proven guilty. If you're being prosecuted, you do not have to prove that you're innocent. They have to prove that you're guilty.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Semantics, they're hilarious, aren't they? They also accused Richard of smothering and or choking the baby in the nursery. I think they were trying to say that he, like, that they did that he did that. And
there was no physical evidence from the autopsy.
Literally none.
That had happened.
Also, semantics, that's not what he was being charged with. He wasn't being charged with premeditated murder. He was being charged with felony murder because a death happened in the commission of a murder.
Yeah.
So
of a crime.
Yeah. Of a crime. Sorry. Not of a murder.
A death happened while committing a murder. Yes.
Shocking.
That's usually how it goes.
Yes. So to present, and these are all things that the whole trial is being presented to the jury, but closing arguments are, like, very much directed at the jury. And for him to even, I don't know. And Richard's defense team wasn't objecting to these things. So they were allowed to be said.
Rewind just a little bit. Speaking of his defense team, did he and Anna take the journalists up on their offer?
Yes.
Okay, because you said that they offered that and he got a new lawyer, but you didn't say that was how they got the new lawyer. Okay.
Yes, they took up the offer. So they do have a decent lawyer, but points have and should be made that he received ineffective assistance of counsel. Is that how you? Whatever. The point could be argued that he did not. That his defense
didn't try as hard.
Didn't do a good job. Yeah. So the defense, what they tried to do, they tried to prove that Richard had an alibi for the nights of the kidnapping and the ransom exchange. He didn't really. It was another one of those, like, well, what were you doing on this day? Well, I didn't know that I was going to need an alibi, so I can't prove it.
I was home with my wife.
Yeah.
She's my alibi.
Yeah, I think it was essentially he picked up his wife from work because that's what he normally did. And all of the witnesses could only testify to, well, that's what normally happens, so probably I don't remember that specific day, but probably what happened is he came and picked her up. You know. They also tried to prove that his financial situation was not as it was presented. Like, they tried to present he's poor. He doesn't have a lot of money.
Like, just because he has this money hidden, again, he doesn't claim that that's his money. It's his former business partner's money, and he's only claiming ownership of this much, not that.
Yeah.
Which is shady.
Shady, but, you know.
Oh, it's not mine. I'm holding it for a friend.
They also claimed that the investigation had been mishandled by police, which it had been. A lot of the evidence had been mishandled. Like, a lot of the early investigation, like, where they didn't secure the evidence and they didn't take pictures, and that was not done great. They also pointed out that Isidore Fish, before he died, seemed to have come into a large amount of money when he left for Germany. There was, I think, a witness that said some of it was in gold notes. There was no way to prove that, though. And then they also did...
How long after the ransom exchange did Fish leave the country?
I want to say a year.
Okay.
I want to say it was 33. I could scroll back up, but then I'll lose my place.
It's fine. I don't think you said so.
Oh, okay. Also, they had done silver nitrate fingerprinting, which I think is something they did in the William Hiron's case. There was similarities. There was also a handwriting expert in William Hiron's case that straight up lied and said that his handwriting matched the handwriting like on the wall, who testified in this case to say that Richard's handwriting matched the so it's like, do we trust these guys? No. Silver nitrate fingerprinting was just like a more advanced type of fingerprinting than what was initially done on site. So they did that on the ladder, and it revealed nearly 500 fingerprints and fragments. None of those were Richard's, which again is kind of just like it's not proving it's just...
Yeah, it proves that he could have been wearing gloves if he was using the ladder.
Yes. Also, just a note, I don't know why I put this here, it could have been somewhere else. A note to the premeditated murder versus manslaughter. Like, this is just another point to say that almost certainly it was an accident. The fact that the baby had been found in a shallow grave that appeared to have not been dug by a shovel, and the fact that the ladder had been left behind kind of indicated that burying the child was not planned for that night. And like, the person probably left in a hurry. That why would they leave a ladder a handmade ladder behind? I think the defense pointed that out. So their closing arguments were, they really tried to push that it was an inside job. They went with that whole theory. They also pointed out, so you mentioned that he might have used gloves. So the prosecution, that was their explanation for his fingerprints not being anywhere. They're like, he was an experienced criminal because he had this past in Germany. He probably knew to use gloves. The defense said, okay, you can't say that he's an experienced criminal, but also you have said that he's stupid because he sat and talked to Condon for like an hour without his face covered. Like, he let someone get a good look at his face. So they were essentially like, he can't be both. He can't be sophisticated enough.
He can't be a smart criminal and a dumb criminal at the same time.
Exactly. I mean, he could, but
you can't.
Unlikely.
You can be smart about some things and dumb about others.
Yes, very true. And then they pointed out, this is the thing that I have always come back to. All of the evidence technically was circumstantial, meaning there wasn't any physical evidence that put him physically there. They could prove very definitely that the ladder came from his house.
Yes. Like, the ladder is tied to him. Or at least part of the ladder is tied to his house.
Yes.
Again, it's unlikely, but not impossible that somebody he knew helped themselves. Or maybe, a buddy was like, hey, I need some wood. I'm building a ladder. Like, I can't afford a piece. Like, I got some wood. You can use a floorboard from my attic. I don't need that floorboard.
They did point out, I think, that the way that it was cut was consistent with an electrician having to cut it away to put wiring or whatever. So they were like, it is plausible that it
was cut away and then he put it somewhere, like he put it outside and someone
took it.
He gave it away, like repurposed, whatever. Yeah. So like, it just shows that the wood came from his house, not even specifically from him. Yes. Yeah. There's no fingerprint, there's no hair, there's no blood, there's no nothing.
Yeah. Obviously he was found with a lot of ransom money and his handwriting was similar to the handwriting. I mean, all of those things technically are just circumstantial. Like, handwriting isn't physical evidence that you can prove. And being in possession of extorted money...
There's a lot of different ways he could have gotten a hold of that money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, that was the jury's final... Or the defense's final, like... Okay. The jury took just over 11 hours to reach their verdict. And they found him guilty of first-degree murder. And right after they found him guilty, the judge sentenced him to death. He did exhaust all of his appeals, but on April 3rd of 1936, Bruno Richard Hauptmann was executed by electric chair.
Ugh.
I know. He maintained his innocence all the way to the end. He refused to confess despite offers to commute his sentence to life and to set up a trust fund for his wife and child, because they were penniless, essentially.
Yeah.
And he was getting the offer of, like, if you just confess, we will change this to life in prison.
Yeah. And we'll make sure that your kids
are taken care of. Yeah.
It's like,
that's
a tough one to turn down. Like, your integrity over the health and well-being of your wife and child.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what choice I would make there.
I know. And, like, I have to think that maybe if he was innocent, he didn't want the shame that his wife and kid would receive.
See, and well, that's the thing is, I remember hearing a podcast about one serial killer who had, he's like, look, I will confess, I will show you a whole bunch of evidence, I'll, like, take you to my murder buckets and whatnot, like, I will give you everything you need, but I don't want a trial. I want to be executed. I don't want this in the papers. I don't want anything. Like, I don't want my kids to know about this.
Right.
So, like, I don't want them to think of me and think of my crimes. I want them to think of their father who loved them.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, I know it's his integrity and, like, his good name over, monetary, like, financial stability for his kid, but, like, what good is financial stability to a young kid who has, like, now the stigma of a murderer father?
Yeah.
Like, what would that kid rather have? Like, a positive memory of his dad and, like, believing that his dad was, wrongly convicted? Or like, oh yeah, my dad admitted to it,
but I have a trust fund.
But I have a roof over my head.
Yeah. And to be fair, Anna spent the rest of her life trying to clear his name. And his son, I think, is still alive and, like, will not talk about anything related to it.
Because this is one of those big, like, everyone knows, at least heard of this case. Everyone has heard the phrase the Lindbergh baby.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't even know. I mean, I knew
the gist.
I knew the gist of it, and I knew that the baby had died. I didn't realize until I looked into, honestly, I think until I was researching William Hirons, that there was controversy over who was executed for it.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know anything about the trial or conspiracy theories and whatnot. I mean, I'm sure there was conspiracy theories. Basically, I just knew the gist of the story. I knew, like, oh, Lindbergh baby. Yeah, heard of that.
Yeah. So even
still today, like, I'm sure that his son is probably just, he won't talk about it because I don't blame him.
Like, I wouldn't. If I believed that my father had been wrongfully convicted and railroaded by the state for the crime of the century,
anyone who finds out who he is, they're gonna immediately ask him, like, oh, did your dad really do it? Come on, you can tell me.
Yeah.
Like, no, leave him alone.
Yeah, it's like no one's first instinct is to be like, oh, I'm so sorry that I would think it would be, oh, I'm so sorry that your father is Richard Hauptmann, not, I'm so sorry that your family had to go through that. That must have been really hard.
Yeah, no, it's like, oh, I'm sorry your dad was a murderer. No, that's not what you tell somebody.
No.
Say, I'm sorry
that you had to go through whatever you're going through. Yeah. My very last point is that John Knoll died in May of 1980 after falling off a ladder and hitting his head.
Karma, maybe.
Karma is my boyfriend.
We don't know for sure.
No. My theory, now that I'm done with notes, what I think was the truth is that John Knoll, I think they were both involved. I think there's enough evidence to point to the fact that Richard was certainly involved in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there's a lot of evidence to say that John Knoll was involved. His personality fits more with someone who I feel like could orchestrate that kind of crime. And the one theory that I read about why Richard never named, because people were like, oh, well, if he was just a co-conspirator, why wouldn't he name?
Well, because then that would be admitting at least some form of guilt.
And also he still has a wife and child.
Yeah.
And this
putting
guy is
them in danger.
Yeah, like a bad person.
Yeah.
Who has escaped. And when John went to Germany, he went either right before or right after Richard was arrested. He came back to the United States like right before or right after he was executed. So he got out of the country.
Want to make sure that get out of the country for the trial just in case his name did come up.
Yep.
Okay, trial's over. He's about to be executed. Let's go make sure that he doesn't do a deathbed confession kind of a thing.
Yeah. And as soon as Richard was convicted, no one
looked for anyone else.
No one looked for anyone else. I think there was an order to continue the investigation, but they were like, nope.
We got our man. We've done.
We got our person.
We did it. Let's pat ourselves on the back.
Exactly.
It's like, did you? Did you do the job?
Yeah.
Did you?
And I think at the very least, anyone who looks at the trial can say there was not enough evidence for
an execution.
Yeah, certainly not for an execution or for beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, I would certainly still have doubts.
Mm-hmm. I do.
And
I mean,
yeah, and
I don't think for sure he's innocent or for sure he's guilty. It's like
you're like, I have reasonable doubt.
I have reasonable doubt. Like it really does sound guilty. He does, or at least he sounds very involved. Mm-hmm. Like there's a few things that just could be coincidence, and like there's a couple of things that just could be like maybe he, again, like we said, maybe he had that wood cut out for an electrical thing and it was just in his yard and somebody took it or he gave it to somebody. Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
Yeah. And
it's too many like wrong place, wrong time coincidences to just be that. Like,
and this is one of those reasons that like I feel okay saying that I'm opposed to the death penalty. And I was talking to a friend about this the other day because she was like, I'm very for the death penalty. And I was like, oh, I'm not. And she was like, oh, well, tell me why. Because I mean, it was a civil conversation. But she was like, I never really hear that side of it. So I was trying to explain like, well, I feel like we need to get rid of it because if we don't, it gives, like, if the death penalty had not been a thing, the worst they could have done is, okay, you're in jail for life. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the state needs kind of that leash on them so that they're not doing things like twisting the law to make this into a death penalty case, to make it a criminal felony, like to do all these things because you are convinced that you have the right person and you are convinced that he needs to die for it. Don't think I'm ever going to feel okay with...
That's personal. Yeah. Like, that's a personal thing. And also, would they have jumped through all those legal hoops? Would they have pushed for the death penalty if this was anyone but a famous celebrity?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
there's a reason that they hadn't made kidnapping a felony yet. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be a felony. It should.
Yeah, they didn't care enough about kidnapping crimes at the time to make them a felony.
Yeah.
Until
America's Sweetheart was affected by it. So that's the story of the Lindbergh kidnapping.
I'm going to go home and hug my kids some more.
Please do. I'm glad to be done with that.
Yeah, me too.
Although I'm still very interested in it. You know what? I've decided to collectively say that American history in the 1930s is of interest to me.
Yeah, this is
in
your era of interest.
I was reading that book I have about the Leavenworth prison escape, and it was talking about something happening in 1932. It's like, oh, the Lindbergh case was going on at this point. I wonder what everyone thought about that. Just kidding. They were busy making sure their prison didn't get broken out of by a lot of guns being shipped in. Very problematic.
That's not how prisons are supposed to work. They're supposed to keep the guns out of prisons.
Very unfortunately, I was reading a lot of stuff and I was like, I kind of understand why Alcatraz had a lot of strict rules, because they very easily got like 8 machine guns shipped into the prison. Anyway, I think next week of this recording, I think we might have a Jarek episode. Ooh. I'm planning that way because you'll be out of town, right? Yeah, and that'll give me time to do oh my gosh, if I could get like 2 weeks caught up on episodes. Y'all. I know one day we're going to spend that credit that we have. Oh, yeah. But you know what? It feels good to be there. So thank you everyone for listening.
If you want to see pictures from this episode, you can check out our Facebook and Instagram. Just search The Tales We Tell podcast. If you want to see pictures but don't do the social media, check out our website, thetaleswetellpodcast.com. And if you want to support us and get yourself some sweet, sweet swag, go to our Redbubble store. Just search The Tales We Tell. We've got several different logos, and we can put that on anything. And if you want to support us, but you don't need the stuff except, early access, commercial-free listening, sometimes some fun bonus content, definitely stickers and love notes, and as always, our undying love and appreciation, you can become patrons at patreon.com. Search The Tales We Tell. And until next week, bye-bye.